a patch of organdy on the face of your garment. Now you've already, this doesn't have interfacing on it, but you would have already interfaced your garment, and you have enough fabric around the patch to have at least an inch around the outside stitching of the buttonhole. Always, and this is my thing, always, always, always make a test using the exact fabric, the exact interfacing, everything, so that you practice before you work on your garment. So step one is to determine the size of your buttonhole and stitch a rectangle the size you need, sewing your organdy patch to the face of your garment. Now, never ever start in a corner. Always start on one of the sides and pivot at each of the corners. So that's the first step. The next step is to slash the middle like you do with a normal buttonhole, with the triangles on either end. So that is step number 2. Okay, step number 3, you pull that organdy to the back and you press it. You have a nice finished opening that's in the front of your garment. It serves 2 purposes. When you're going to put the lips on, you actually have something to hold on to, as opposed to that tiny little seam allowance that you have left from cutting the rectangle. So when you have this part, you need the lips for the buttonhole. And what I do, and what I was taught to do, is you sew your 2 layers that are going to be the lips, very long basting stitch, and you would press that. So you have your seam down the middle. Now you can lay that piece directly behind your opening. You can play around with it. If you want that to come off center, or if you want it directly in the middle, you're able to do that. So what you want to do is take a pin and pin wherever it is exactly, or you can baste, and then fold back one side. And you will stitch right on the previous stitching, making sure to catch or stitch just inside the thread so that that stitching won't show. Then you will fold that piece out of the way and repeat to the other side. Then, when you're happy that you've gotten it where you want, you'll flip it back and sew your little triangles down. So the other thing is, if you want the lips of the buttonhole to have a little, instead of being totally flat, you can stick a piece of yarn in them before you sew that little triangle down, and that will give the lips a little more body. So generally what I do when I make a buttonhole is I mark my center front so I know where everything has to start, and then I mark also with thread the center line of the buttonhole, and I always do a long way past the buttonhole. I do, 2 or 3 inches off each side, because you know that the thread always pulls out. Also, don't press over it, because a lot of times that thread will leave a mark if you have a fine fabric. If it's got texture, it's not such a critical thing. But you want to use silk or something like that if you're going to press over it. The second kind of buttonhole we're going to talk about is also a bound buttonhole, a Spanish snap buttonhole. But what you do is you figure out how big you need this buttonhole to be, and then it needs to have space on each end, like the organdy patch method. And in this example, it's 2 inches by 3 inches. And what you need to do is create a rectangle and then turn that into an oval. So this would be how you find the size of the oval that you're going to. You make your pattern based on that rectangle and turning it into an oval. So that will become the pattern for what will be the facing of this buttonhole. And what you want to do is you want to trace that pattern, as many as you need, onto your fabric on the bias. That's the key to the whole thing, is the ovals have to be on the bias. So you're going to want to interface your fabric, but not what's going to be this facing. Because if you put the interfacing on that facing, it won't be stretchable anymore. And that's the secret to how this buttonhole works. So here we are with my center front line marked, but I marked it on my facing. So I know where the center line of the buttonhole is. And I've placed it. And what you do is you do just like you did with the bound buttonhole. You're going to start in the middle and you're going to go around and you're going to take like 2 stitches. You want your stitching to be very short, but you want like 2 stitches at the end of the oval on each end. Then you're going to do just like you did with the bound buttonhole, except you're going to slash from end to end. There won't be any little triangles. So you have to clip right up to the stitching. So you clipped right into the stitching and you have your fabric and you're going to turn it to the other side, and this is where the name comes from, and you kind of get the ends and you snap it. And what that does is it pulls the ends in and creates very narrow lips for this opening. You might want to take a little piece of iron-on, like Wonder Under or something like that, and put it here to keep these ends inside. Now we'll move on. Triangle buttonholes. This is a triangle buttonhole. And it's so much fun, and it's really easy. So the trick to this is marking. And I have all this marked. I have my center line, my center front line, and where each buttonhole goes. And the trick to it all is making sure you have enough fabric to turn to the back side through the buttonhole. Because this facing that you're making, and I'm calling it facing, and this is facing, because that will be what turns to the inside of the buttonhole. You want to make sure that that piece of fabric is big enough to work with on the back side. So it becomes the lips of your buttonhole. So you want to, it's easier to make a bigger square or rectangle than you need. Depending on how long your buttonhole needs to be, you want to have the point at the point you want the edge of the buttonhole, and then how long it is. So those 2 marks need to be made. Then it's up to you. How wide do you want the wings, or I guess it would be the base of the triangle. You can make the base of the triangle as wide as you want. It does come down to a point. But however wide you want that base of that triangle to be, you can make the lines make that work. So you have your center line and your starting point, and I guess this one might be about 1/2 inch. So I need to take, and you want to draw your lines on your facing so it will disappear. This is permanent marker. Don't use permanent marker. But you want those lines to extend past the point where you're going to sew, because you need to be able to see that. So you're going to draw a line from your point, past the point, all the way to past the point of the end of the buttonhole. And then you want to make the other side match. So like if you went 1/4 of an inch one way, you want to go 1/4 of an inch the other way. Then you're going to do like all buttonholes, and you're going to start in the middle of one of the long sides. And you're going to stitch to the corner, and you're going to take 2 stitches across the corner. You'll be able to see how I did it on the back of this one. But you want to stitch across, you don't want to pivot. You need a little space for all this fabric to go. And that's why you will stitch 2 stitches across each of the points. So you have 3 points. Then, when you have done that with a small stitch, about 1.5, you're going to take and slash just the patch or the facing, not your garment, in these lines that I have drawn on here. The reason you slash these 3 is because that fabric has to go through the opening of the buttonhole. Okay. So then, what you're going to do is you have these 3 pieces, and you will turn them inside through the opening that you have stitched. I make sure you don't have a pucker in your corners. And they won't go all the way to the inside because you are covering these triangles. That's what is filling the lips of this buttonhole. So it looks different than a rectangular buttonhole. You see, you're going to end up with a piece like that. What you want to do is you turn these in, and what happens, this is the magic, you only have to stitch this once. You flip all this back, and you're going to stitch only on that little triangle. And it seems kind of counterintuitive, but that's all you have to stitch down. Now if you want to, you can stitch in the ditch around it to hold the rest of it in place. Now there is, everybody goes, oh, what do you do with the back? Okay, you know I'm into faced openings, so one of my favorite things to do is take fusible interfacing, have the fusible side up, the rough side facing you. You're going to put this on the right side of your fabric. Fusible interfacing, I can't call it wrong and right side because I get totally confused. The right side of your fabric has the unglued side next to it. You're going to do your buttonhole stitching just like you did on the face of the buttonhole. Starting in the corner, pivoting, then you can turn this whole patch. Oh, and you'll cut the lips out because you don't need them for the hole. And you bring this interfacing to the inside, and then you would iron, and you would have a nice finished opening that matches the back of your buttonhole. And you would tack that by hand. The other magic of a triangle buttonhole, all you do is you use a piece of striped fabric as your facing. And by the nature of how this buttonhole is made, when you pull that to the inside, the striped chevron, it's pretty cool how the stripes work for you. And you don't have to do any fussing around. That's a variety of buttonholes.